Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now, a question that has come up a couple of times is how would I paint winter Krieg? And I think given that they are long coats and gas masks and what have you, they fit the look pretty well. Today what I am going to have a play around with as well is the new historical paints coming from the Army Painter. I'm going to mention one or two alternatives because obviously they aren't out yet, but they are coming soon. They're available for pre-order and individual bottles will be for sale. So don't worry if you don't want to pick up the whole sets, though they are pretty good. I'll pop links to all of that information in the description too, along with all of the paints that we're going to be using today. So nice and quick, let's get started. So right up top, you'll probably have noticed that the mask and helmet are a little closer to the original Krieg look. And that is because I'm using an alternate head. This comes from Tiny Legend, and I'll make sure there's links in the description there because I've printed this one at home. You can purchase the STLs, or if you don't have a 3D printer, you can also order them direct from Tiny Legend and get physical prints. So if you don't have a printer, you're not going to miss out. I think it really improves the look of the plastic Krieg. I love everything about them except the mask redesigns. Matter of personal choice, and painting them is going to be much the same whether you've got these masks or the plastic ones. But once you have got your fella assembled the way that you want, first thing to do, of course, is to prime them. Now I've started by hitting this fella first of all with a spray of matte black, and then from a roughly 45-degree angle, I've gone around him a few passes to give him a nice smooth matte white over the top. This gives us a little bit of shading in the recesses. It's a really easy way of making sure that if you are bulk painting infantry, whether it be Krieg, Space Marines, whatever, you get a little bit of shading in those recesses. So nice and quick, and because I am painting him white, I have gone over probably a little bit more than I would have done if I was going to be painting a traditional acrylic over the top. So nice and bright, couple of passes with the white, and there is the majority of our painting done. Now, the big trick with quickly painting an army is to start in areas where you're likely to make a mess, and then every other step over that is going to be a tidy up stage. So where you're most likely to make a mess, at least on these guys, is probably going to be the eye sockets. I'm going to pop in a little bit of grim black, and it doesn't have to be black, you can use any color you fancy here. Personally, I like that grim, awful, soulless appearance that black lenses give us. Now while I had the color out, I also painted in his gloves. I didn't want to think too hard about what I was going to do with those, so black will do. What I'm going to use now, this is actually Mid-Feldgrau, and this is from the historical range that Army Painter have got coming out soon. They're up for pre-order now, and they have pointed out that they are going to do individual bottles as well, so don't feel like you need to pick up the entire set, though there are some pretty good ones in there if you're looking to paint historical miniatures. In the interim though, this is actually quite similar to Evergreen Fog, though Evergreen Fog's a little bit darker. I just want a greenish color for the trousers. If you didn't mind it being darker, you could also look to Deathcore Drab. Now because I do want to lean a little bit into the green on this fella, what I'm going to do is use Necrotic Flesh here to paint in both his leg wraps and the blanket on his pack here. Now I'd suggest if you wanted to do, you wanted to swap the colors around a little bit, maybe you got gray trousers, then I would probably use something like maybe Baron Dune or Tomb King Tan. Go for a beige color instead, but playing up the green, this is what I'm going to use. So what I'm going to turn to now is actually a speed paint. I'll flip them around here because the boxy design of the packs and what have you always makes me think like this is going to be leather or like a treated plastic or something rather than fabric. So I'm using here Satchel Brown, and I'm going to be careful as I come near the Necrotic Flesh I've already painted. Not too worried if I do hit it though, because I can go over the Satchel Brown relatively easily. Now some areas are going to be a little trickier to reach, like for example the straps on his chest. Sometimes will be at a slightly funky angle. As much as possible, don't worry if you hit anything that isn't the jacket though. So you see him getting a little bit on his shoulder pad there, but I'm not worried about that. I'll just keep turning him until I get the right angle to approach from and get my straps painted. I decided in the end to also do his boots with that. We're not going to see very much of them by the time we've finished basing them, but it needs to be painted some color, right? Now his mask, likewise, we could paint with a speed paint, maybe pallid bone or something, but I'm going to use here command khaki. So just carefully around the edge of the eye socket there. All right, now I'm going to paint in the wooden parts of his rifle. Now what I'm using, ironically enough, this is rifle brown. This is another of the historical paints, and it comes in all of the paint sets. So if you order all three, you're going to end up with a fair chunk of this. Now this is pretty close to Dryad Brown, so if you want to use an existing Army Painter color, you can do. I find this is a little bit lighter than Dryad Brown, but without being quite as light as Fur Brown would be. Get him in shot here. But I'm going to go over the wooden parts of his weapon with this. Now if you've been painting Games Workshop miniatures for a stretch of time, you might remember a foundation paint by the name of Caradon Granite, and it was perfect. Well, guess what? It's back. This is dark olive, and this one is again from the historical range. I've probably thinned that out a little more than I should have done, so I'm going to have to come back and give this a second coat. But what I'm going to do is paint over all of his hard equipment, so his armor, this little canister back here. I'm going to paint these with a couple of thin coats of dark olive. Just, oh, look at it. Caradon Granite, my beloved, you have returned. Oh, that's the stuff. I love that color. Now what I'm going to do for the metallics is to use heavy metal. Now this one is from the John Blanche paint set. The individual pots for this should be going on sale relatively soon, but you could just as easily use gunmetal here if you fancied. I'm just going to go over all the weapon, bits of his buttons and what have you. Anything that I want to be that dark silver. Now for a couple of the decorative and even some of the functional stuff, what I've got here is true brass. I'm going to start by painting the ring on his mask with this, but I'll also do his belt buckle, and yeah, the silver on his helmet's not enough for me, so let's do that in a brassy color. Almost done with base coats. What I'm going to turn to now is Turnbull Turquoise. Now this is a speed paint, and I could just as easily have used the black from earlier, but I like this because it's got a touch of greenish blue to it. It's got a funky kind of rubberized look, which really suits, I think, the gas masks. And then I'm going to do just a couple of minor details on the rifle in black. Now once I've done this, I'm going to do a little bit of tidy up with some matte white on some of the parts of his jacket that I hit. So once you're satisfied that your base coats are all in order, it's time to wash them. And for this, what we're going to do is to mix up some marine juice. Now I will link in the description to where I talk about what this actually is and why it's useful. Basically, it is a dark brown wash with a little bit of warmth and enough medium in there that it doesn't stain all that much. It's kind of a universal wash, useful for loads of things. Now ordinarily I would make this using a couple of Citadel products, but folks have asked, is it possible to make it without using those? And the short answer is yes, but. Honestly, if you want the same results, you need to use the same materials. But we can get pretty close using just Army Painter stuff. And on top of that, because you're going to color match to your own work, it doesn't matter too much if it's not exactly the same between one brand to the next. The utility of it is really the selling point here. So what I'm going to do in one of my little wells over here is basically equal parts speed paint medium, warm skin shade, and dark tone. Couple of drops of each, mix them up really well. Now if you're ever worried that this is too dark, you can just add a little bit more medium. And to be honest, you don't have to go to this sort of extent if you don't want to. You could just thin down a little bit of strong tone. Whatever you're going to use though, because we're working with predominantly white clothing, thin it down. Anyhow, enough of my rambling. Let's apply this over the entire miniature. We want to make sure that we are working it into the recesses so that it's going to pull nicely. However, any big clumps of it that you see, what you can do is shift that around while it's still wet. So over everything, make sure we've doused our miniature thoroughly. Then we'll go ahead and pop them in the sun, somewhere to dry for about half an hour. We'll see what we'll get after that. And then, once that's dried, we have a winner. There are a couple of spots where I wasn't terribly careful about applying the wash, particularly on this side of his jacket here. If I'd been paying a little more attention, I would have been able to move that big blotch while it was still wet. I'm not too fussed though, because once you're painting 10 or 20 of these guys for a squad, you're not going to see that. But what I will do is grab a little bit of matte white, and this time just a few little highlights along some of the creases. You can do as much or as little of this as you want. Ideally, don't jam it into the into the creases. I'm going to do some of this off screen, but yeah, just a few little white highlights on the high points to sell that shading a little further. You don't have to do this, but it will look cool if you do. Right, that's nice and quick, and you will get quicker at it, particularly when you are finding, repeating shapes on a squad of miniatures. It gets pretty easy to just pick those out nice and fast. Now what I'm going to do, this is actually a highlighting method that goes back to an old orc army from an ancient white dwarf now. Well, I say ancient, everyone's going to have a different opinion on what that is. What I have is plate mail metal. And we'll use this, of course, to highlight some of the metal parts. I have a little bit much on my brush there. But as well as that, what we'll do is treat a few of these elements, like the helmets and the back of his gloves here, we'll treat this as being metal. And instead of going through 3 or 4 different colors to highlight, with just little scratchy dabblings, very, very technical term there, you can create nice scratched metal and just do it all off of one color, one brush. You don't have to add very much of this at all. It takes a bit of practice because you are using just a tiny wee bit, and it is possible to go overboard with this quite quickly. But, like I said, a bit of practice, and you'll be rocketing through your highlights in no time. Now he is ready that you could go ahead, pop your transfers on and varnish them. From here, this is quite happily tabletop standard. But what I am going to do is just a couple of extra highlights, because it's always nice to take it a little bit further and see what you might do if you fancy spending a bit of time. Maybe you're only doing a kill team, or you just want you guys to look kind of nice. So I'm going to turn here to Patagon Pine, and I have thinned this down a little bit of water, just to make sure that as it goes on, it's not going to overpower these trousers too much. I might actually thin that down a little bit more. Now with some Grotesque Green, which is a wonderful color name, I'm going to go ahead and we'll go over the necrotic flesh with a few little highlights. Then the final highlight that I'm going to apply is a little bit of light battle dress. Now this one's from the British paint set, and I might do some of this actually off screen. This would actually have also made a pretty good base coat for the mask itself. It's kind of similar to Skeleton Bone. It's not quite as light, and with maybe a little bit more warmth to it. Okay, now what I'm going to do is take him outside and hit him with a matte varnish spray. I'm actually going to use the Army Painters one today. After that, I'm going to go ahead and base him. Now I will link, again, in the description. There'll be a video there on how I've mixed up the snow paste that I'm going to use. It's not all that involved, but it will add quite a bit of extra time to this video. So if you're interested, go check it out. But it's nice and quick, so I'm going to do that now, and then we'll get a look at this fella once he is all finished. And so, there at last, our winterized Kriegsman is complete. And I'm really pleased with how that's turned out. In particular, man, that dark olive. The return of Caradon Granite, that is something I'm dead pleased about. Now, there are, alternatives for almost all the other colors. If you don't want to go down the route of following this exactly, like I said, just eyeball a few different things. You're going to get a great result no matter what you use. Really, the trick here is to remember, thin down your washes. It's always going to help to make sure that you're not just drenching the thing in a single grimy color. Agrax Earthshade, I'm looking at you. Do thin your shades no matter what you're using. So, as always, thanks goes out to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of my wonderful patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my most gorgeous producers who are showing up on screen now. Seriously, folks, you are the ones that keep this channel going. I really appreciate it. Now, any questions or anything, feel free to drop them in the old comment box below. My Blue Sky and Instagram are both linked there too. So, thank you very much for your time, one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.